Okay. All right, everyone. We are going to get the international relations panel started. If you could please return to your seats. All right. Excuse me, everyone. Please return to your seats. We're getting on with the next panel. Thank you. So I am Dr. Peter Braga from the School of Slavonic and Eastern European Studies here at University College London. Today, our panel, we have four excellent speakers. One is returned, fantastic. So first we have Ethan S. Berger from Georgetown University, and then we have Andrej Kallaur, who I think, there you are, fantastic, yes, who will be presenting online for us as well. And then we have Natalya Kovaleva, and she's from Chatham House. And then we have Dr. Ina Čepić, who is from Jagiellonian University. So, yeah, without further ado, I'm going to give panelists about 16 to 17 minutes for their presentations. And then after that, we will open the floor to questions, and we'll do all the presentations and then questions. Yeah.
Can you move one seat in this direction?
Okay.
Otherwise, people will not see it all.
Sorry, so hop along this way so that the people online can see us. Fantastic.
Yeah, perfect.
Right. All right. So if you'd like the microphone so people online can hear you. So you're just talking that little nib.
Okay, I will start by correcting the record, which is though I still use my Georgetown email address, I'm a graduate there. They didn't take my course. I'm an adjunct there. So for the record, I'm not from Georgetown University, though I am from Georgetown University because I spent a lot of time there. But officially, I'm on the faculty this year, though I'm teaching a class, and they turned it down. So anyway, but let me just tell you how I come here, which is, for me, this is very personal. It's a huge gap. Because I was very active on Belarusian stuff, and it started off back when Belarus became a country, because the Kevich government were trying to set up, and I got to know the first Belarusian ambassador to the United States, who was the only Belarusian in the Soviet embassy. And at that time, the law firm I worked for, Hatton, Boggs and Blow, decided that we were going to be the Washington reps of Belarus, and I was going to open up an office in Minsk, which most people wouldn't have wanted to do. For me, it would be kind of funny because my maternal grandfather was from Nemiga at a certain point. And so I thought it was kind of funny. And so it ended up not going that way. And I also did, at that time, I did a series of presentations to the government there, mostly lawyers. But another thing happened which was very fascinating to me, and it relates to this topic, which is that Department of Justice I was working for Department of Justice on a contract at American University in DC. And at the same time, Lawyers Committee for Human Rights and the American Bar Association were very, very concerned about the status of the legal community, which was under assault under Lukashenko. And so I did a net assessment of the status of the legal community, independence and whatnot. But what also was really interesting, this guy, Sergei Martinov, who you may know his name because he sort of became famous, and he maybe been a deputy minister later. I got to know before Lukashenko had taken over. So as a way of protecting me, he gave me, and he was still in DC, he gave me a list of people at the government that he wanted me to meet with, because he knew I was meeting with human rights activists and these types of things. So he said, in essence, Ethan, when you're in Minsk, I want you to visit with these people. In essence, he was saying to them, this guy's not a crazy person. You know, he wants Belarus to do well. And he's basically telling me how to stay out of trouble. So I didn't have trouble when I was there doing that. And so that's an important, I think, backdrop, which is that I have had a very strange relationship with diplomats in Belarus, including, you know, anyway, a bunch of them when they passed through Washington, and I've got phone calls inviting me to have lunch, and I have to run through Department of State because there's not that many people that follow Belarus. I mean, I think, you know, when there's like a political asylum case, expert witness thing, there's like 4 or 5 people to ask. And they go to David Marples first, or when David can't do it, they then call me. But that's sort of all important background. Now, this project relates to the fact that last year I went to the ASEES conference, and I went to every single Belarusian session, and I learned about what was being done towards EHU in terms of it being sort of set up to being the enemy, you know, an extremist organization. And it wasn't, and that happened, I guess, last October. And I started thinking, you know, I should go back there on a Fulbright. I was at a Fulbright in 2013. I taught at University of Vilnius, but I also did a series of lectures at EHU, where it was both before and after the presidential election. And so I thought Hillary Clinton was going to win. I gave all these presentations about why Hillary Clinton was going to win. And then I left, and that didn't happen. I then had to come back and explain why that didn't happen. I was in a state of shock. And so that's sort of me and EHU. But I decided it would be really interesting to go back to EHU. And I think it's very interesting what EHU is sort of in the past and not now, which is EHU functioned like Hong Kong functioned for the PRC before unification. That basically the Belarusian government realized that it's useful. Now, their students, where do they end up? Most of them end up going back to Belarus. A lot of them end up working for international companies, dealing with Belarus, and a good number of them end up working for international organizations. So it's a net positive for Belarus, even though it's annoying for the government that people in the opposition are tied there. But also the faculty is like half people who have appointments in Belarus, and then they go to EHU. And so that they can afford to teach at Belarusian university because they make their real money when they're at EHU. So it's this very strange relationship because it's almost like a couple where they hate each other, but they're too poor to get a divorce. And so that was what it was like until Donald Trump became president. When Donald Trump became president, all bets are off because the American government does not care about Belarus. They never really cared about Belarus, but now they really don't care about Belarus. They're not bothered by the fact that Belarus is a launching pad for the invasion of Ukraine, which would bother someone like in the prior administration. It would bother any prior president of the United States. What's really strange is right now we are basically in a period of time where the post-war era is over, and we're in a period of time where it's not clear what we are. The United States, I don't know if people know, there's a very interesting series called Occupied. I don't know if people, it's a Norwegian series, and the premise is it's the best thing in terms of TV series. I always find it very annoying to watch these TV series take place overseas because very often people are speaking languages that they should not be speaking. In Occupied, when Norwegians are talking to Norwegians, they speak in Norwegian. When Europeans are speaking to other Europeans, they may be speaking in English, they may be speaking French or German. When Russians are speaking to Norwegians, they're speaking in Russian. And so I always find it so annoying when I watch series done for the United States, which are in English, because they're thinking those people wouldn't be speaking English. And so Occupied is good. Occupied is premised on the idea that the United States has pulled out of NATO. Now, what's very interesting about the shooting of Occupied, they started shooting the series when the invasion of Crimea began. And it's all premised on the fact that the United States has pulled out of NATO. And so there's basically a creeping invasion of Norway where the Russians are promising to ship oil to the EU because Norway has stopped shipping oil to the EU because they've gone nuclear and they're trying to export the nuclear power. So that's all the basic background of Occupy. But what's interesting here is that reality has become like that TV series. And so you should watch that. But getting back, I'm going to try to jump ahead. Right now, Mr. Lukashenko is trying to suck up to Trump. He's like, Trump has this sort of vanity project, which he thinks is going to be important. And Lukashenko knows how to suck up to him. And there's a little bit of, back and forth where Belarus is now releasing more prisoners, political prisoners than it ever have in the past, as a way of making it possible for them to be treated like a normal country, which they have never been treated like a normal country. No one really knows how to treat Belarus in the United States. Anyway, so that's just sort of background. I'm just going to jump over these things because you don't want to see my slides, but everything that's important that I want to convey to you is in my slides and in the paper, which I am in the process of revising, because as I read it for the first time, for 4 hours in my hotel room, I started seeing what's wrong with it. And there are lots of things which are wrong with it. One thing that is very important to understand is when an organization like a university is labeled an extremist organization, that basically criminalizes all their students. It criminalizes their faculty. And it's very, very hard to understand that because the natural order of things is to treat everything as sort of propaganda and think that there's a line of activity that you're allowed to pursue up to that and not past that. And if you cross that line, you're in trouble. But if you're merely like going to EHU, there's no trouble. Well, now the line is gone. No one knows what's going on. EHU's student body, it's not clear what's going on with them. Their faculty is not clear. I was supposed to go to Vilnius to teach at EHU in October. And after the Supreme Court opinion was handed down, mind you, it's not a published opinion. It's not a real opinion. It's just basically a political action where they say that EHU is an extremist organization. It's not clear how it's going to play out. But the university is terrified because the students have to make a decision where in terms of their own personal lives, the implications for them professionally, their families, etc. Same thing with the faculty. The whole place is a mess. You can't plan in this environment. So getting back to trying to think what else is important going forward. Well, how am I on time?
You have 5.5 minutes.
Oh, I'm
6.5.
anyway, I'm actually going through much quicker than I had planned. But basically, I do something very different when I do presentations. I'm very used to talking to foreign students and I always tell people everything you need to know from me talking is on the slides. I don't want you to take notes. I want you just to write down something if I say something that you think is wrong or you think is clever. Otherwise, everything that would be assigned the reading is already there because English is never their first language. I mean, I'm talking to people like, for example, in Colombia, where I had like a UN situation where you had a translator. And these were like the best people at Universidad Cerrado Veleda. The former president of Colombia is a former student of mine, a guy named Ivan Duque, who's the only Colombian president who's not a crook to have left office. Ivan's from a wealthy family. He's a good student. He actually earned his A, and he liked my class. So I went back to his university twice to teach a semester class over a 2-week period. And so the students there all understood enough English that they understood my lecture, but the slides were in English and in Russian, and there were interpreters, and it was this dynamic situation where the students were correcting the interpreter and whatnot. It was a lot of fun. And this is what I'm hoping to do at EHU. Though the classes are all in English, I don't know what the language ability is. I've also lectured in Russia and Ukraine. I've lectured at the Institute of State and Law. Kharkiv Academy for Law. I've been Saratov, Odessa, and Leningrad State University, now State University, St. Petersburg, the Philfach. I've lectured there as well. And so my style is sort of the same. I try to be flippant and be entertaining, because when you have foreign students or foreign listeners, they're not getting everything. So you have to be different from everyone else. And the thing is, to academics, they look at me and say, this guy has never been a real academic. I've taught adjunct, I was full-time faculty American. I taught in Australia for 3 years, the only tenure track thing I could find. So I went overseas. But for the most part, I've been a sort of programmatic lawyer. When I was at American University, I was in essence in a money laundering operation, because the Ukrainian and Russian governments stopped giving to Department of Justice information that they wanted on organized crime and things like that, and the situation in those countries. But there's a carve out in the civil service of both countries for academic work. And so someone who works for the government could basically write a paper for an American school, and which is publishing it in a journal, and give you the stuff they used to give automatically, but now they're getting paid, they're privatizing their job, and they're giving the same information to the US government through American University, which is in Washington, D.C., and funded by Department of Justice. Department of Justice was telling us what topics they wanted to know about. They wanted to know about weapons exports. They wanted to know about trafficking women and children and all these types of things. They weren't getting the information. So they established this program to do that, to get the information through another channel. And I basically ran this research grant program to get that information. And we would do a tender, and all these academics in Russia and Ukraine would send their submissions for the papers they're going to write. Invariably, they're writing with government officials who are giving the information that they used to give automatically. So that was an interesting time. Unfortunately, that era is over with Yeltsin. And basically everything has gone bad with Yeltsin. I'm sorry, with Putin. It was good. It was going through a bad phase with Yeltsin. And I don't know if people are aware of how Putin ended up as president, but one of the stories, which for me is an old story, but most of you are very young, don't know this. Sergei Stepashin could have been president of Russia. Sergei Stepashin was head of the MVD. He was in charge of the conflict in Chechnya. He was against the escalation. But basically, Yeltsin said to Stepashin, how do you read the immunity clause in the Russian Constitution? Do you read it as covering all presidential acts and their family and members of the family? Stepashin said, no, it doesn't. Don't cover that. Then they say, well, how do you think about the war with Chechnya? And Stepashin said, it's terrible. It's like, we're losing a lot of people. We're losing the war. So basically, Stepashin gave honest answers. Putin told Yeltsin what he wanted to hear. And within a matter of weeks, Putin was the successor to Yeltsin, all because Stepashin was a decent person. And that's an important backdrop. But I'll answer your questions, which are not necessarily relating to what I just told you, which I hope was entertaining. Oh, one more thing. You should buy David Marple's book. Okay? It's autographed, inscribed, and I'll be taking that paper to reflect things I learned.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much, Ethan. And I think I'm going to continue according to the program. So without further ado, would Andrej online please like to sort of take center stage? I hope he can hear us. Yes, there he is. Fantastic. And I assume you need to share your screen?
Hi, hello. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
Oh,
so I can share it if I have the right. Is it okay?
Yes, yeah, we can see your slides and you're ready to go whenever it suits you.
So I have 16 minutes, right? So we can start.
Yes, please.
Okay, so hi, hello everyone. So my topic is dedicated to I call it no longer analog. It's let's say reply to the Almira Osmanova article in Belarus, and this she argues that Belarus is still analog dictatorship, but I would like to show you some evidence that it's not correct. But with one remark, yes, this is a field is really um, changeable. So it's her article was written a few years ago, and now it's definitely another picture. So I would like to speak about Belarus digital authoritarian transformation and tech-driven alignment of the authoritarian international. For Russian speakers and Belarusian speakers, I think it's more understandable if I say authoritarian international. It's related to communist international in the middle war period, exactly. And I would like to start with a brief introduction. It's some kind of like very preliminary analysis I did before start the research a few years ago. What I found is institutional uncertainty in Minsk, right? Their authorities fear mass protests. They try to protect their political sphere. There is also rapid IT development. Despite all the arguments we know right now, there's IT escape from the country, but there is still a huge IT sector, and in 2025, IT is one of the driver of economics and established infrastructure. What I mean here is not just IT sector we know from the zeros, right? But also information communication technologies and factories established in a share period. So there is a huge engineer background, huge factories, expertise, and universities which study and teach people regarding this technological stuff. So I call it established infrastructure. And in my opinion, yes, these reasons and among the primary reasons why Minsk has become a hub for the development and implementation of tools for control and suppression. Especially as Rudny Korshunov, it's a consensus in literature, so it's especially since 2020. There is some steps have been made before 2020. We can talk about it, but the main wave is 2020. So definition, different definitions. So we can open Freedom House. We can relate it on definition by Stephen Feldstein. I found it more beautiful, and he interpret digital terrorism through the digital repression. And what does it mean? It means usage of information and technology to survey, coerce, manipulate individuals or groups to deter protests, at least. Also, from his book, I will show you later, this brilliant book about contemporary digital authoritarianism. He argues that there is no real digital authoritarianism. So digital technologies do not change their meaning of state, structure of the state, but I don't think so. I will also tell why the reason we can say there is not just digital repression, but the digital authoritarianism shaped by a digital term. And what else? Yeah, in literature review, what I found, and it's not just me, but our community scholars recognize as an issue, as a problem, this we are talking about digital authoritarianism through the lens of Russian and Chinese studies. We skip such countries as Belarus. Yeah, so, and in my opinion, Belarus offer a fresh perspective of the development digital authoritarianism. And yeah, Daminov, it's from Ildar Daminov from the Central European University, the first scholar I found that he pointed on this issue. So literature review, going deeper. Also brilliant article by Roberts and Osterom. They revealed also there's a significant empirical gap and repeat Daminov point that there is only China and Russia. So we overlooked regional variations. And what is a regional variation itself? We don't know. Do we have another type of digital authoritarianism? From the other point of view, Belarus is depicted as a state with pure democracy ranking, right, and with a really low digital repression score. When I found this from the Steven Welchstein, I couldn't agree with him. So yeah, it's just my criminal picture, as I said. I went further and find more evidence about this. And also there is some articles, chapters about exactly Belarusian digital authoritarianism, Alesa Rudnik and Gennady Korshunov, his recent chapter in a Routledge book dedicated to Belarus. It's more descriptive. Alesa Rudnik, they're great scholars, but I found also gaps like overall they focused more on legal framework rather than technology itself and the transformational aspects. And of course, Almira Usmanova, yeah, her article about Belarus, and there is mention that it's still an analog dictatorship. And I found, yeah, after 2 years, probably she wrote it in 2023, I don't know exactly, it was published a few years ago, and I found no evidence on the analog dictatorship right now. Literature review, going further, there's, yeah, the next question. The first one is Belarus, what the place of Belarus in the digital authoritarianism landscape. And the next question is how Belarus, and is it like, we can speak about it or not, impact Authoritarian International. One of my favorite books, Stephen Hall, and also based on interviews, a lot of insights from Belarus, from Belarusian like people, let's say, who work in their system, out the system. And yeah, I just advise you found in this book and read it. And but there is no digital aspect revealed. So there's a new topic for us, and yeah, I take this frame, but added to this frame new perspective as a digital cooperation. So just briefly, this concept was introduced by Vitaly Savitsky 16 years ago. And what does it mean? It's a the group of states, they coordinate together to deter the protests and let's say like unwelcome international influence. We can say it's a CSTO or BRICS or Shanghai Cooperation, whatever. But I'm not interested in this organization, but exactly on their trading, their agreements, and their cooperation in trainings, in educational, regarding everything to suppressive digital tools. And yeah, we know some research about Russia and China export. We know that Russia is more communicative oriented digital authoritarianism. China is more technology based, providing some hardwares to the countries, and no real information about such countries as Belarus. Yeah, also, I would like, if you have any questions, you can just stop me. I don't like to speak from the one way. If you have it, I would appreciate during the presentation. And also, dear Peter, if you can just tell me 5 minutes before the end, so please tell me the time because I don't.
You have 6.5 minutes.
Okay, so theory. I took this theory from the article of Roberts and Ostrom, the 5-element framework, how they see digital authoritarianism. The first one is, of course, power holders, politicians, apparatus, siloviki, whatever. The second one is digital technologies, repressions, and this second group of effects. It's they say it's in order to achieve the desired second order effect. So it means maintain the power. The first one is immediate impact. They're protesters, activists. The second one is regime power consolidation and maintenance. So I take this theory and also looking how I can develop the theory from the perspective of Belarus. And I will show you. The second one is Authoritarian International. I just brought here the Viktor Shadursky approach. He great historian on international relations, and he distinguishes the post-Soviet space, I would say Eurasian Economic Union, and the West, Global South, and separately China. So I will deeper analyze this direction except the West. So there's a question, which digital technologies does the regime employ and which possesses the potential to strengthen other authoritarian regimes? This is, let's say, really draft research questions. I can say I need to probably improve it. If you have any advices, welcome. And methods, case study design. So yeah, it was hard to find proper information from the open sources because some of them in Vietnamese language, Chinese language. So some Belarusian stuff on the internet. But also I found good reports from Citizen Lab, Access Now, Freedom House, Bloomberg, and as I already mentioned, official set communications from the Belarus, Vietnam, China. So everything I found. And also interviews. The most important part is 10 experts. I have consent and they agree to be de-anonymized. So, but I would like to. I know this presentation will be published. For now, let's them stay anonymous. And why 10? Probably after the 6.1, there was a theoretical saturation, nothing new. So they repeat each other, and I didn't find any arguments to continue find experts. There are investigative journalists, propaganda monitors, hack activists. So I cover everything, and they help me to cover blind spots from the literature. First of all, I went to this question: do we have adaptability in Belarusian regime, within the Belarusian regime? Can we speak about institutional strength according to Murila and Levitsky? So if there is no adaptability, how we can measure digital turn, right? But there is. So 7 experts marked as a moderate. Two of them is a high and one expert is a low. What does it mean? So they usually describe it as there was a scale from 1 to 3, and this also so description is like the regime has made a significant leap forward the recent years. They adapted quite well. Everything regarding digital development. So yeah, there is moderate assessment. The next one from the open sources, just really briefly here, because in my article already wrote it, there's a lot of them. So no, I don't mention here any hack activist group pro-authoritarian, pro-regime, but there exist. Google reports show it. But first of all, we can say about drones production. So this drones production, full circle of drone production belong to Belarus. They do not buy it from the outside. They develop it from within the city. There's a lot of companies, and there's Academy of Science, there's Agata private company. There's also a Chinese Belarusian joint venture. They all produce drones, and these drones used for monitor larger zones, at least in Minsk, as according to the state official news agency. And
You have a minute left, Andrej.
okay. The second one is a Republican system for monitoring public security. We don't have information beside the official state information. There is 60,000 smart cameras. What does it mean? They employed AI system, face recognition system, and everything is under control of this Republican system for monitoring public security. They also replicate it in the local cities. And what else? The great system of education. Academia of Internal Affairs, Belarusian State Academy of Aviation, they all teach students how to use drones, how to use AI system. They have agreements with Vietnam, China, Russia, etc. There's a huge list of everything I found. I don't have time, so there's traffic tracking, unified database, Mayak system for geo-tracking, spying software, tools as a duplication SIM card, video surveillance, AI face recognition. They can block websites. They can track social media using software from Russia or domestic produced. As for instance, AI face recognition is Kpot, and
Your concluding remarks, please, Andrej.
okay. So as you see, it's a huge list. And results. Very briefly, Belarus is top producer of software regarding to the security, regarding to the control within the Eurasian Union, Economic Union. So 138 softwares from the 195. Top one. In China, what we have a Huawei Development Center in Minsk. We have cooperation in drone production, Sputnik production. We have, they have, yeah. So data solution, everything. So there is a huge, and with China, there is a high level of cooperation between Belarus and China. Global South, it's a new direction. We have Myanmar, we have Vietnam. Myanmar is interested in IT and AI. Artificial intelligence in content creation. I found this information not just in Belarusian state official media, but in Myanmar as well. And discussion. So I would like to add to this 5-element framework 2 elements. The first one is external factor. So the digital software tools open the new perspective for authoritarian regimes. They trade it, they cooperate within this, train people, everything. So the next one is a third order effect, the cultivation of technological fear. So according to Wright or Furedi, there's there's constant fear of to be observed or monitored. And there's effect which really stop protests or protest activity, political activity in such countries, and it proved by huge literature foundation. Okay, and one more case, it's from Feldstein. He also argued that the digital technologies really do not change the regime and also decrease the Siloviki influence, but it's not the case in Belarus. Siloviki control data and possess tools. There's a lot of departments as GDB, OATS, Ministry of Internal Affairs, everything related to Siloviki, and they control the data, and they also collaborate with propaganda. Conclusions. So as I say, there's moderate adaptability, and it's a core that enable operators to exercise power more efficiently, saving time and resources, right? Extended the reach of operations, and thousands of tools gave them opportunity to cooperate with China, Vietnam, Russia, and according to respondents, yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Andrej. We really appreciate it. Thank you. I want to keep this moving.
Okay.
All right. All right. So, Natalya, would you please take the next presentation? Do you need microphone?
We have slides, Natalya, or no?
No, I'm just going to take great well. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Should I just?
Yeah, you can either clip it or hold it up to the microphone. Goes into a little nub.
Yeah, great. Hope this works. Amazing. Well, hi everyone. Thank you very much for having me here today. It's a great pleasure to be here. I am an academy fellow within the Russia and Eurasia program at Chatham House, where I'm based for just under a year. And my key research engagement and my project is in political prisoner diplomacy as a medium of international negotiation. And today I'm going to talk about Belarus as one of the key and very kind of prominent examples of that particular form of diplomacy. Negotiations over swaps and releases of political prisoners are becoming an increasingly prominent feature of Western engagement in a whole of Eurasian region. The August 2024 exchange between Russia and the West became the largest since the Cold War, and meanwhile, Washington has been conducting talks with Minsk that have led to phased releases of now almost 500 of political prisoners, with further talks still ongoing. These negotiations, they pose a fundamental foreign policy dilemma where humanitarian gains and reopening of diplomatic channels must be weighed against security, strategic, and ethical trade-offs. So these include the risks of legitimizing authoritarian regimes through high-level diplomacy, granting disproportionate concessions, and incentivizing future repression by embedding people into diplomatic bargaining. So kind of broadly, my research is focusing on three key questions. One is how authoritarian regimes, and here the Belarusian regime, uses political prisoner releases as a tool of diplomacy. What are the incentives and interests that are shaping that engagement? And lastly, what lessons can be drawn from recent practice for future Western policy, especially as this negotiating track is very much alive and still ongoing. So political imprisonment is not a new tool in Lukashenko's arsenal. He's been systematically using it to remove opponents, intimidate the opposition, and deter dissent since he got in power in 1994. So following the 2006 election, he famously imprisoned one of the presidential candidates, Alexander Kazulin, along with 8 authorized representatives of another candidate, Alexander Bilinkevich. Then in 2010, 7 out of 9 presidential candidates were detained and interrogated by the KGB, alongside with 700 protesters, journalists, and civil society members. So when we got to 2020, and I'm sure I don't need to elaborate in this room on the context and history, the harassment and imprisonment of opposition and protesters has grown to kind of unprecedented levels, and leading to internationalization of the regime and, of course, rejection of the election result by a wider international community. So we see across all these election cycles a growth in repression, and reflecting an escalating pattern of political imprisonment that kind of reached its pinnacle in 2020. So it is definitely not a new phenomenon, but is very unique in its scale. According to Vyasna, by 2023, the number of political prisoners grew to 1,500. And among them, pro-democracy activists, human rights advocates, opposition figures, journalists, foreign nationals, and of course, ordinary Belarusians who joined the protest in 2020 and spoke out about them online. So this ever-intensifying pattern of repression, it doesn't only have kind of domestic incentives behind it, it also always had an international audience. And each high-profile arrest historically has drawn international condemnation, led to sanctions or threat of sanctions from the US and the EU, and kind of amplified the pressure of the regime. So over the 3 decades, Lukashenko has learned how to kind of convert this pressure into leverage. He released small groups. In 2008, he released 3 people including Kazulin, who was detained in 2006. And then 6 people in 2015, both ahead of elections in 2008, ahead of parliamentary elections, and in 2015 ahead of presidential elections, not just to soften his own image domestically, but also in response to threat of sanctions from the EU and the US, and in an attempt to warm relations with Western partners. And there are some coincidences where, following the releases on those occasions in 2008 and 2015, there were kind of talks with the Americans that followed within days. There were IMF loans that were granted within months, and sanctions that were lifted on individual members of the regime within weeks by the EU. So as those releases were kind of framed as gestures of goodwill, they also had foreign policy implication, and that did not go unnoticed by the regime. So while opportunistic, these early exchanges proved the utility of selective pardons of political prisoners as diplomatic currency, one that carried relatively little domestic cost but had very considerable foreign policy returns. So with kind of few diplomatic options available post-2020, when the international isolation grew to such a great extent, Lukashenko turned to hostage diplomacy and political prisoner diplomacy as one of the few forms of political communication. And at first, this instrument was used to kind of signal openness to dialogue, to signal readiness to engage, and create favorable conditions for negotiations. So although unilateral pardons began in 2024 and coincided with some of the negotiations, kind of back-channel talks with Biden administration, no releases happened until Trump got in power. And the first American national who got released, Anastasia Nufa, she was released unilaterally by the regime within a week of Trump's inauguration, which took the development kind of took notice of that release in the United States and quickly opened the door for future engagement in bilateral diplomacy. So then a few more US citizens were released within a few weeks, and it very much played into Trump's renewed emphasis on bringing Americans home, and his office of the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs, that is one of the few institutions in the world that works specifically on kind of political prisoner diplomacy, hostage diplomacy matters. And quickly, from releasing US citizens and inviting high-level talks with the Americans, after 5 years of not having any high-profile American diplomats, the engagement kind of grew in momentum. With each release of political prisoners in 2025, greater than the last. So it's 14 people in June, 52 in September, 123 in December. And of course, these were not releases in a classic sense. There were forced deportations into forced exiles for most of those people who left Belarusian jails. So what became as a signal for openness became something much more ambitious. We saw over the last year how it turned into a sustained diplomatic practice and a track, and a space within which the regime can pursue domestic and foreign policy interests. So what are the motivations, and why are the parties still engaged? And there is more talks that announced for later this month, and this kind of engagement is very much going forward. It seems like for the American administration that the measurable, clear diplomatic outcomes is what is a big motivation. It kind of fits into the transactional sort of style of deal-making diplomacy that the administration has become famous for. And the language that is being used in official statements and social media posts by the negotiators themselves and President Trump is very kind of numbers-driven, and it's very sympathetic of the whole process and very complimentary of what Trump calls highly respected President Lukashenko, kind of breaking that previously united from a front of isolating the regime from the EU and from the US, who previously refused to recognize Lukashenko as a legitimate leader of Belarus. So for Lukashenko, this dedicated diplomatic track offers quite a lot of carrots in diplomatic terms. So firstly, as boosting legitimacy, the praise from President Trump, the promise of a trip to the United States is on the table in the next round of talks, and a reopening of a US embassy in Minsk after 18 years of not having one. All of these kind of concessions in return for releases of political prisoners is kind of offering a way out of diplomatic isolation for Trump, and kind of normalizes the relationship of high levels of diplomatic relationships with the regime, even though Europe is so far standing firm on its policy of non-engagement. And secondly, and importantly, it leads to US sanctions relief. We've seen several kind of, as phased as releases of political prisoners have been, the sanctions relief measures have already also been quite staggered and quite calibrated, but it's the aviation industry, the Ministry of Finance, and 2 state-owned banks, as well as 3 potash producers, have now had measures introduced to lift sanctions against them. I have a few minutes left, so I'm going to accelerate. So broadly, what is new about this is that as opposed to Cold War style classic prisoner swaps, where people often imagine a bridge in Berlin and people being exchanged for other people, here we have a lot more on the table, and this engagement contains within itself a broader set of considerations, of interests, and of foreign and domestic policy gains. And the fundamental problem that not many policymakers really know how to address at this stage is the so-called revolving door of repression, where releases and detentions run in parallel. So in 2025, 360 prisoners were freed, 509 were newly recognized as political prisoners. So while this form of diplomacy undoubtedly saves lives, and there is a humanitarian element to it, it may also incentivize the imprisonment kind of that makes them possible in the first place. And for Western policymakers, entering this kind of engagement without a theory of how to exit it becomes they become structural participants in this very system that they're trying to dismantle, essentially. And the lesson here is not that engagement is bad, but that engagement without conditionality attached and highly politicized engagement should be calibrated, and it is unlikely to produce any systemic change. So another thing, one point I'm going to end on is that the case of Belarus is definitely unprecedented in modern diplomatic history. We haven't really seen similar engagements of very kind of phased, protracted diplomatic tracks of this kind. And it creates a precedent whose implications kind of go beyond the country and might incentivize other autocrats to engage in similar forms of coercive diplomacy. And we have already seen this in Venezuela, in Iran, and Russia, in other places. So I will leave a couple of minutes for Q&A. I'm going to stop here. I know there's a lot in there, and it's really hard to pack every single nuance into 15 minutes. So I welcome your feedback and questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Yeah. All right. Dr. Chip, if you would.
Yeah, and I need my presentation slide.
Yes, thank you so much, Gary.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
You have the mic on? Fantastic. Yeah.
do I have? Yeah, okay.
Okay, whenever you're ready.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Ina Čapek, and currently I'm a visiting researcher at the Jagiellonian University based in Poland. And let me start with the simple but very fundamental observation. International trade, as we understood it for most of the post-war year, has been replaced by something structurally different. So international trade is no longer governed primarily by efficiency. Increasingly, it's governed by the geopolitics, financial infrastructure, sanction system, digital platforms, and regulatory standards now determine what can move across borders and what cannot. And Belarus offers actually an unusually clear case study of this transformation. After the 2020 political shock, and especially after Russia's 2022 geopolitical shock, Belarus became deeply exposed to sanction-driven fragmentation. Farrell and Newman describe this as weaponized interdependence. So when dominant states using control over global infrastructure like payments, cloud services, or regulatory systems, they use it as tools of coercion. Knowledge-intensive services, that's my primary object of research, like legal work, consulting, IT-related services, management consulting, are especially vulnerable because they depend on compliance system, digital connectivity, financial access, and professional recognitions. And unlike commodity trade, it cannot be easily rerouted around these institutional barriers. So why Belarus? Because Belarus represents a near-perfect choke point economy, it's highly open, highly dependent on external infrastructure, and lacks the strategic option of reorienting towards Western markets like Ukraine or Georgia. By 2023, Russia accounted for more than 2/3 of Belarusian trade. Meanwhile, the EU share collapsed dramatically, and this creates three research questions. So how did individual KIS sectors, subsectors respond? Which sectors adapted successfully? And what trajectories are likely over the next couple of years? A major methodological challenge is that Belarusian statistical transparency sharply declined by 2021, forcing reliance on mirror data and triangular evidence. So to analyze this, I developed the choke point augmented survival analysis. Well, traditional trade survival models assume market-driven exits, while CASA instead focus on institutionally activated choke points. So the framework maps KIS sectors, subsectors, against 6 choke points, which are payments, intellectual property, cloud infrastructure, the WTO exclusion, professional certification, and of course, human capital migration. And the framework combines resilience index, stability recoverability metrics, and concentration analysis using WIHI index. So that's concentration of partners, which accounts for diversification of exports of imports. So 6 choke points form the operational core of this analysis. First, payments. Belarusian banks were progressively removed from SWIFT beginning from 2022. Second, intellectual property. Belarus authorized the use of patents from unfriendly states without their permission, so it was excluded from international organizations govern the patents, the usage of patents. Third, cloud infrastructure. Belarus lacks general data protection regulation adequacy status, so major providers like Ozone service, Amazon service, or Azure exited in 2022. Fourth, WTO exclusion. Belarus became increasingly detached from any multilateral dispute infrastructure and in general, the possibility to enter the WTO. Fifth, professional certification. The Big Four departed, while EU sanctions later prohibited in 2024 professional services entirely. And 6, the most dramatic, that's human capital. An estimated 500,000 people left Belarus between 20 and 25, including a large share of IT-related specialists. So these choke points differ significantly in reversibility. Well, let's say financial restrictions can be easily revoked but human capital loss or professional desertification cannot. Yes, one of the most unexpected findings concerns payments. Sanctions did not simply isolate Belarus financially. They helped generate parallel payment ecosystem operating outside Western oversight. That means that Chinese government and Russian government created an equivalent of SWIFT payment settlement. And so the majority of banks from the BRICS are already included in these networks. So in general, Belarusian firms adapted through residual SWIFT access, about 15%, Russia's and Chinese equivalent of SWIFT messaging system, cryptocurrency and stable coins, and also diaspora-mediated payment networks. There is a very interesting case of Russian payment agents. And actually, they say about 70% of transactions between Russian and international counterparts goes through these kind of payments. So that means that money does not cross the border. So they pay to the agent in Russia, and the other agent who has the account, for example, in Singapore, they just transfer the money to the exporter. So it's not a policy success, but we see that structural unintended consequences. Belarus also evolved into what I call a connector economy. Because the EU sanctions on Russia KIS services preceded equivalent sanctions on Belarus by roughly 2 years, Belarusian firms temporarily occupied this intermediary position between Russia and international markets. And the second connector function emerged digitally. Unlike Russia's highly controlled RUNET model, Belarus retained relatively open internet infrastructure. This allowed Belarus to function as a digital neutral zone where Russian-linked workflows could continue operating through VPN, of course, but through international accessible systems. The result was a form of a networked resilience distributed across Minsk, Warsaw, Vilnius, and other diaspora hubs. At the aggregate level, Belarusian KIS exports fell roughly by 46%, but aggregate statistics conceal enormous subsector divergence. Computer services declined sharply but remained operational through adaptive restructuring with the help of diaspora. Information services proved relatively resilient. Consulting entered structural collapse, and R&D showed explosive growth that appears statistically implausible. The resilience index reveals not simply which sectors survived, but actually which sectors remain structurally fragile. This slide visualizes the 4 archetypes: Fortress, Phoenix, Zombie, and Ghost. The important point is that sectors with similar numerical resilience scores can follow completely different structural trajectories. First, computer services present the central paradox of the study. Official exports collapse, yet the sector continued functioning at over $1 billion through what I call Phoenix plus proxy model. Belarusian teams remained physical in Minsk using VPN services, while contracts and payments were routed through entities in Poland, Lithuania, or Cyprus with the help of shell companies. So the work survived, the Belarusian origin became statistically invisible. The R&D services boom appears fundamentally different. A 300% increase under sanctions conditions strongly suggests systematic relabel actually of IT exports as R&D services to reduce sanction exposure. This has important implications, very important for sanction monitoring globally. Consulting services represent the clearest irreversible decline. Unlike IT services, professional services depend on institutional recognition, certification, auditing standards, legal accreditation that cannot easily be relocated or improvised. At the same time, Belarus increasingly functions as a proxy hub. Computer services imports rose nearly 270%, while exports simultaneously collapsed. This asymmetric pattern suggests that Belarus was intermediating service flows between Russia and external markets. In other words, Belarus was not simply absorbing sanctions pressure, it was reorganizing around it. The partner structure also changed dramatically. Belarus lost high-value Western markets, especially the United States, the UK, major EU holding jurisdictions. Replacement partners fall into three categories: relocation jurisdictions like Poland and Lithuania, genuine new demand markets like China and India, and proxy jurisdictions where routine activity appears to dominate to help Russian market. The distinction matters because not all diversification reflects real resilience. All subsectors show declining concentration values. In standard trade analysis, this would suggest successful diversification of trade, but in Belarus' case, diversification often reflects the mechanical loss of dominant partners rather than strategic expansion. So the central conclusion is that Belarusian KS sector has bifurcated into two increasingly separate economies. The domestic circuit is integrated into Russian infrastructure and standards like engineering services, professional consulting, and R&D. And the diaspora circuit is integrated into the EU economies. And over time, these two systems become progressively less reconnectable. Historical comparisons are instructive. Taiwan maintained successful diaspora reintegration through active institutional bridging. Cuba illustrates the opposite outcome, a permanently detached external economy, let's say in Miami, and Serbia represents partial recovery after sanctions, but only over a long horizon over 10 or 15 years. And Belarus is now approaching this critical 228 window where reversibility may sharply decline. So I model three possible trajectories of the KIS sector development. The first one is partial rehabilitation. This would require political de-escalation, partial sanctions rollback, restoration of financial access, and rapid institutional rebuilding. Without it, outcome degrades to the Serbian model. Scenario two, the inertial scenario, that's the most likely one. Network resilience continues functioning, but at diminishing capacity. The domestic circuit becomes increasingly Russian-oriented, while the diaspora gradually integrates in the Western market. After 2028, without a diaspora bridge, trajectory shifts towards the Cuban model. And scenario three is accelerated lock-in. Secondary sanctions close shell company structures and proxy jurisdictions. Under this scenario, Belarusian IT exports could collapse within 2 years. And the critical point is that Belarus lacks Russian capacity to absorb this shock internally. This leads to the main policy implication. Current sanctions policy focuses almost entirely on restrictions, but it largely ignores the long-term structural consequence, the potential permanent loss of a Western-oriented Belarusian knowledge economy. The diaspora bridge concept proposes three instruments: regulatory clarity for subcontracting, maintenance of professional qualification, and frameworks of eventual reinvestment and reconnection. So that's not about sanction evasion. It's about help for Belarusian knowledge economy. Let me conclude with 5 core findings. First, aggregate statistics conceal major structural divergence. Second, Belarus increasingly functioned as a proxy intermediary rather than isolated economy with the help of network resilience. Third, statistical relabeling complicates sanctions monitoring. Fourth, Choke points differ dramatically in their reversibility. Finally, the diaspora timer is the most important and strategic variable. The critical window falls between 2028 and 2030. So the policy tools needed to preserve reconnectability, and they're actually technically feasible. So geopolitics didn't just disrupt Belarusian service trade. It's restructured who Belarus can trade with, under what legal framework, through which payment system, and at what cost. So the sector is not one economy anymore. There are two diverging ones. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. All right. Can you get the microphone back?
Sure.
Can anyone help with the mic? See whether we have any others.
Yeah, there's Miłosz. All right. So I'm going to begin. I'm sure you have plenty of questions, so I will try and I will begin with a set of questions for the speakers. And I will begin with Ethan. And Ethan, I liked that you used the comparison with Hong Kong, because I grew up in Hong Kong. It's my favorite city in the whole world. But yeah, you said figuratively that and it's the name of the university is European Humanitarian University. Yeah, sorry, European Humanities University is figuratively like Hong Kong. But I wondered if you could sort of, if you were saying EHU is kind of like, you know, between East and West, it obviously has some international relations function, right? And so I'm going to ask you, you know, how do we see this in IR terms? What is it like is it primarily a soft power instrument of the EU, a civil society actor, an external democracy promotion institution or something like this, right? And how does its existence complicate traditional distinctions between domestic Belarusian policy and Belarusian foreign policy, right? So this complex, all right? My question for you. And then my question for Andrej is, I have a bunch of questions, but so you were saying that Belarus has made a digital authoritarian transformation. But now I'm kind of fascinated with recent events, right? And as we see in Russia, the heavy clampdown on the internet, right? And the way that they're, you know, stopping doing their digital authoritarianism, right? It appears like a lot of Russians are moving to the much freer internet space, the neutral internet space of Belarus, right? The liberal Belarus. Right? And so obviously there's a qualitative difference between these types of digital authoritarianism. And I was wondering if you could please comment on that. This feeds into your argument on the nature of regional types of digital authoritarianism. So I wondered if you could please speak to Belarus's type of digital authoritarianism. And then my question for Natalya is, I had a bunch of them as well, but we'll start with one. So this, I may be stretching this a bit, okay? But to what extent can the Prigozhin Wagner soldiers, right, who were based in Belarus after the mutiny and all this, can they be seen as a different manifestation of this prisoner diplomacy? Because Russia, they don't know what to do with them. We'll put them in Belarus, right? And now, are they prisoners? What are they? Are they part of this diplomacy? What does this? So could this be fed into this argument? This seemed like an interesting comparison, and maybe this completely doesn't fit within your definitions and is pointless. But I thought that was interesting. And lastly, to Dr. Ina Chepik. Right. So Can you comment on the re-globalization argument that is kind of popular at the moment? You say that trade is becoming driven more by politics and less by efficiency, right? Some people argue this is the end of globalization. Oh no, tariffs going up here and there, this kind of thing. But there's another argument that this is a highly Western-centric argument. And instead, trade is re-globalizing south, right? To the global south, for example, India, Middle East, if you can say that's in the south, right? And to what extent has Belarus been able to, if at all, be a part of this re-globalization of trade? For example, more ties with India, these kind of things. I have no idea if your research touched on this, and I don't mind. I have plenty of other questions if you don't care to answer this one. All right.
We have 10 minutes, maybe we'll have one round
Yeah.
of questions and one round of response.
Yeah, okay. So do we need questions from the floor? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Yeah. So questions from the floor?
There are microphones.
Here, I can toddle off. Sorry. So name, affiliation, and your question.
Thank you. My name is Emily. I'm a postgraduate student at the University of Oxford. I had a question for you, Ethan. I was really interested to hear about your work and just wondered if you could elaborate slightly. So you said that the releasing of political prisoners was a step towards Belarus being treated as a normal country. But I wonder to what extent that is true, because I noticed that in much of the regime discourse, Belarus is depicted as a unique bridge between the Russia and the West, able to hedge between both spheres. And I wonder to what extent, if being treated like a normal country is a foreign policy ambition, or if it's rather a strategy that serves the construction of an image of diplomatic prowess for Lukashenko. Thank you.
Any other questions from the floor? Yeah. Name, affiliation, question.
Sure. It's Pavel Shevtsov here. I think for Natalya question, the difference between, because I know there's a policy that, with hostage takers, there's no negotiation, they never pay ransom. And why is it different in case of states? Because essentially dictators do the same thing. They just sort of hold people as hostages and then expect some payout. Maybe you can explain that. Yeah, thank you.
Right. Great. Oh, last question. Great.
My name is Hanjo Jang from South Korea. I'd like to give one questions to Ina and Natalya both. Recently, in exchange of prisoner release of Belarus, USA reduces some sanctions, like sanctions for Belavia and Belarusian Kali, and some sanctions for Belarusian banks. So I understood these SDN list already been removed. So is that is it meaningful to Belarus? It was worked. I'd like to ask about that.
So we'll begin with this set of questions.
Not more than 5 minutes.
Yeah. So who would like to go first? Yeah, Ethan. All right. You go.
Actually, I'll start. Peter, your question that you posed is not as good as the other question that you wrote
Right.
down, which is first, the Hong Kong thing is kind of a flippant thing.
Yeah.
The reality is Hong Kong mattered for the PRC economy because like Hong Kong was the principal trading partner. And EHU, the only reason was useful in terms of trying to set out the complexity of the relationships in terms of Belarus to the EHU. And it's just a sort of useful framework for understanding the complexity of relationships where you have multiple motivations in leading to behavior which is not easily explainable by a single causality. But the more interesting question, which I do not know the answer to, which I'm a great believer in AI, where you asked me what was the domestic Belarusian attitude about EHU, which is a question which I never thought about in my work. And so I've done this, and I'll be incorporating what I've learned, in my paper. But basically, it breaks down more or less with the politics within Belarus, that people who are anti-Lukashenko, are very pro-EHU and they know about it and whatnot, and the people who are like the movement proletariat within Belarus are not overly happy about it, don't really care. It's not part of their experience anyway. So I'm going to look at that a little bit more. That's just what my cursory understanding of what Claude and ChatGPT tells me. But I have to verify that. But to Emily's question, let me say several things. One is Trump looks at Belarus entirely through a Russian prism. Belarus is not a real country to Trump. Belarus, in my head, prior to reading like more of like what David Balples, my head is like Belarus is not even a country that should really exist. It's a demographic failure, and its history is kind of weird. And I actually wrote about that back in like 2008, where I distinguished between like real countries and states. And to me, Belarus is simply a state. It's not a real country. But I was being very flippant back then. And I still basically, when I'm being flippant, I really believe in what I say, but I will not defend it to the death, certainly. It's just trying to be entertaining and have a vehicle for understanding it. But as I say, when I was reading David's book, which he's much more focused in on Belarus as Belarus, it's a part of the country which I really don't know, because I'm a Russian speaker. I don't spend time in the countryside. The only times I was in Belarus, I was in Minsk, and I was also in Mogilov, and that's it. That's not the country. It's like saying you go to New York City, and that's like the United States. We go to London, that's the UK. It's not. I have no idea what the country is really like. But from the perspective of Trump, Trump has to be able to show that he got something for surrender and legitimacy, and being able to invite Lukashenko to come to the United States, which is absurd that the United States would ever host him. He goes to the United States to go to the UN. They have no choice. But the fact is, there is no just domestic constituency for being nice to Lukashenko in the United States. The constituency to be nice to Lukashenko is in Moscow.
Right. Thank you, Ethan. So I'll pass the question on to Andrej, if you could.
Yep. Oh, thank you for your question. First of all, I would like to say, so I consider the news from the media as with high criticism. I just checked the numbers of Russians with work permits in Belarus. It's 4,000 people. So it's absolutely insignificant number. How we can prove how many Russians migrated from Russia to Belarus because the restricted Russian regime, I don't have answer. So just 4,000 people, it's insignificantly. The second one, if we compare Russia regime and Belarusian regime, I would like to apply here the concept of scholar Shedler. It's about uncertainty, institutional uncertainty. The first regime, Belarus, in my opinion, there's no reason to shut down YouTube, Instagram, and other platforms. They're, in my opinion, again, they absolutely feel certain. And regarding Russia, their level of uncertainty is much higher. They blocked YouTube, Instagram, and try to replicate this Chinese idea of a closed internet. For Belarusian regime, the most used social network is one of the most used social network is TikTok. Belongs to China. There is evidence of deleting political content. The most used AI chat is DeepSeek, also highly under the censorship. And I think they simply can apply such criminalization of news from their free media. Like if you comment it, you can go to the jail. So the free media usage is really dropped. I don't see any evidence to copy Russia style and China style in Belarus. And for them, it works. For instance, they can easily apply a complete internet shutdown during the protests, as they show with Canadian software. But as I know, they already have their own software for blockage. And also, yeah, so that's it, I think. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. And Natalya?
Thank you. Thanks. Prigozhin question. It is interesting. There's a lot going on in Belarus. A lot has been going on in Belarus because it's not just Prigozhin fighters. There's also prisoners of war. There's also political prisoners. There's lots happening. How does it fit in? I don't think it really fits in with a political prisoner diplomatic track because that particular case they weren't used as necessarily leverage. I think it was more of a tactical accommodation of Vladimir Putin to kind of try and help him to solve a problem that he had following the mutiny. And as far as I know, most of them went on to Africa and some went back to Russia. So it didn't really serve a purpose in terms of leverage and in terms of concessions. But Lukashenko likes to be useful. And he's offered to host Maduro. He's offered to help Melania Trump with her cause about Ukrainian children. I think it's another way of him to try to be kind of useful to the Kremlin. The question about difference with hostage diplomacy and political prisoner diplomacy is a really good one. One important thing here is just difference in language and definitions used in different parts of the world. Americans really like to use the word hostage diplomacy, and they have passed the Levinson Act that kind of enshrined it as the definition, and they have the special presidential envoy for hostage affairs. So both state and non-state actors can be deemed hostage takers. In the EU, it's more about political imprisonment. Then the UN doesn't recognize political prisoner as a term. So there's a lot of ambiguity in the language itself, and even referring to people being freed or released or deported or exiled, it's kind of everything just carries a different kind of weight linguistically. But beyond that, it also kind of reflects different approaches between the EU and the US because the EU hasn't really approached, a lot of EU countries haven't approached Minsk, even though their nationals were inside prisons for several years. And it's only through the American track that those foreign nationals were released, mostly due to kind of coordination between partners and kind of the political will on the US side that's very prominent. So it's, I think, describing a similar phenomenon, but just with kind of different terms. And sanctions, how meaningful the lifting of sanctions has been for Belarus in all these different sectors. That is a really good question. And it seems like the lifting of sanctions has been really calibrated and phased. And the latest one in March 2026, we're still yet to see what happens with that. The removal from SDN lists of the potash producers, and to say banks had general license revoked and SDN for potash. But it appears that as long as the EU sanctions stay in place, that regime is a lot more comprehensive, is a lot more, it just has a lot more sanctions within it. The US sanctions are not expected to have a profound and meaningful effect on Belarusian economy because as long as, for example, the port in Klaipėda in Lithuania is closed, no potash can go through to the EU through that transit route. So, and transporting it through Iran is now difficult. Going through Russia is very expensive, very long, and Russian railways are geared towards the war, so there's not really capacity in the ports or in the kind of in the whole transport kind of system. So it seems like as long as the European capitals stay firm on keeping their sanctions in place, we won't see a very kind of meaningful effect so far. But who knows what happens within a month or 2 or 3. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So I can continue the issue about potash transportation and exports. And actually, after the decision of Trump, the trade was a little bit lively. So the first quarter actually fixed 80% growth in comparison with the first quarter of 2025. It happened because, the counterparts are not afraid to pay in dollars because, there was they lifted the sanctions from dollar payments. So we see that so it works. But actually, as my colleague mentioned, there is still very low possibility to transport through the main route through Klaipėda. And we have like 93% of the exports, which is of potash goes through Russian ports, and only 7% to China with the help of railway transportation. And there is also another risk. Belarusian Kallaur applied to economic court in Hague, and the case price is about 12 billion of euros for unilateral seizure of the contract from the Lithuanian government. And who knows? Well, that's very likely that they might actually win because, they are neutral in concerning the contracts. Well, that's concerning the potash issue. As for globalization, I would term these phenomena as fragmentation, because actually this recent studies was on political alignment of different blocs and how they actually trade, and I identify three, let's say, blocks, which are political alignment with Western bloc, neutral, and China bloc. So I use the index from the way the voting systems function at the general at the General Assembly, at the General Assembly. And what I discovered that it still exists. So there was a rerouting of the trade, the increase of the trade between Western bloc with the neutral, let's say, bloc, and the increase inter-trade in the, let's say, Chinese-Russian bloc. So it exists. It's a fragmentation, I would say. As for Belarus, can it actually be included in this value chains, global value chains? Well, it tries hard. And we see actually certain increase in trade. If we compare it from 2025, the first quarter, and 2026, the first quarter, so it's like about 20% increase in different sectors. And actually in IT sector, there also was an increase of 10%. So we see that this diversification works. Whether it's a proxy, whether it's just changing jurisdiction, or it's a genuine demand, we cannot actually say it for sure, because as I mentioned, I used very difficult mirror statistics was produced by the OECD, so that's balanced trade statistics, and it's up to 2024. So how it functions, how this trade functions in 2026, so we will have to wait for another year, because Belarus publishes only aggregate numbers without classification in countries. So we can only deduce though something grown, something collapsed, but we cannot actually track who was the reason, and who actually was the one who produced that.
Right, fascinating. Well, thank you to our speakers, and yeah.